We've got Chip here. He can answer questions too. Anyone have any questions from our 87 years of expertise? I know it's there. Jason, go ahead. What's a frequent question that you get?
We get a lot of questions regarding case submission process. What is required to submit a case? As I mentioned, we can accept any digital raw STL file from an intraoral scanner. That's the most time-effective way to send cases to us. But we also accept cases via analog impressions, traditional PDS impressions, as long as they are accompanied by a bite registration, intraoral photos, and the accompanying prescription form. We do have a lot of back and forth with labs as they're first getting started because the communication channels aren't always clear. We have very set criteria and requirements on what we need to begin a fabrication process of an aligner case. So that's probably one of the most frequent as we start to get into the aligner space with new customers.
That's a great question. And then since I've got you on the line here, I had another question for Cadmus. Does Cadmus work with labs too? And how does that work?
Absolutely. Cadmus actually started as a membership lab network community. That was where we started our business model and our philosophy on helping independent labs grow and maintain relevance in a digital market. As you know, so many of the big companies started coming in and buying out and gobbling up all of the little independent labs. So we made it our mission to work with independent labs and independent lab owners, navigate the world of digital dentistry. And naturally, we found ourselves getting into clear aligners and allowing those independent labs to be competitive, offering their own branded clear aligners. So great question. We do a lot of work with independent labs.
All right. Okay. And I've got a couple questions here for Chip. First question for Chip is, oh my goodness, so many questions for Chip. Okay. And if you don't know any of the answers, we can always ask Tom later.
That's okay.
Is there some, he knows, is there some type of cutting machine you recommend for Zendura FLX?
Okay, I'm not quite sure whether you're talking about a 3D cutting mill or if you're talking about tools that are typically used in a orthodontic office. But for Flex, we recommend using the same tools that you typically would use. We here, when we're cutting and trimming or polishing a Flex aligner, we use a curved pair of scissors, small pair of high quality scissors to do the initial cut and also to do the final cut as well. Some labs like to use a heat knife to do the initial cut, and then for the final cut, they'll go back, use a pair of high quality curved scissors to do the final cut.
But that's something to seriously consider when you're selecting your thermoforming product, because patients do eat with them, and they just do. So.
Oh, you did that table?
She did. And then actually we have a few more questions that came up. So I'm going to go ahead and ask a few more questions since we have tons of them here. And they're all related to you guys. So will Bay Materials be releasing another type of Zendura? If so, for what purpose? You may not be able to answer that. Are you releasing more Zendura? Yeah.
We do have development projects under works. I can't give you a time frame or the design material, of course, but we are committed to the orthodontic and dental community. We're committed as a materials company, so sure, we're working on it.
Awesome. And oh my goodness, for Tom, is the staining due to the other material being more porous, or why is the other material staining more?
I believe there is a more porous material on the surface of the aligner that I was demonstrating, so it is more susceptible to taking on the color of its environment. So I'm not at all presenting that the patient's aligner would look like this after a week, but with a standard test to find out what happens, that the material on the outer surface of that device is more likely to take on color.
And I've seen it clinically too, so I can attest to that, whether they had a Coke or they ate some curry or something like that. I have a question here from Sergio to me. When you use Zendura FLX, you always switch aligners every week. That's really up to you clinically, and I might you know, throw that one over to Tom. I mean, I know some people that do. I know that definitely Invisalign is FDA approved for weekly change. Can you answer that question?
Sure. As a materials company, we're in the business of supplying anybody that wants to buy our material. We find that clinical practice varies widely, as Amanda was saying. So we do have customers that are evaluating their aligner therapy for 1 week. We have customers that are still using 2 weeks, and then with more complex cases, the therapy with each state can vary from that as well.
I'll go back on video to answer a few more of these questions, and then we'll come on over and do, there's a lot of questions about trimming. So we're gonna be doing that live and we'll answer those questions then. But really it's up to you. I mean, really it comes down to patient compliance and how your check-in process is. And we have a lot of great videos and demos already on YouTube through StraightSmile Solutions about that. Feel free to connect with me one-on-one about that too. If you have a great check-in process, you can use something like dental monitoring system, then you can go ahead and expedite that and do it maybe a little faster, like 1 week changes. The main thing is that it's tracking, and you have to have a check-in process. You can't just let the patient just go for it because they really don't know. And if you don't understand what tracking is and how that works and the property of the materials and how that relates to that, then we can talk about it. So Scott and Jason, they say, oh, okay, we'll get to that in a minute. So, but yeah, Lauren's in Netherlands says she goes 2 to 3 weeks. I think that's him actually. Really up to you and how you want to use it. And there's nothing wrong with going more time, but you know, from a patient perspective, if they can do it faster, they would rather do that. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and don't worry, we're gonna be talking about burrs and trimming shortly as we do the demo. There's one more question for you first. Do you have 2 millimeter thickness plates?
2 millimeter?
No.
No, we don't. Zendura is so much more durable and strong compared to the PETG materials that our 0.76 millimeter, even as a long-term retainer, 0.76 millimeter material is a standard. We do have 1 millimeter thick material, but one millimeter feels pretty stiff, but it is available. 2 millimeters now.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. We ready to move on to our next demo?
Well, just real quickly, the some of the materials available.
Where a period is concerned, you know, we leave that up to the clinical professionals to make those decisions.
Well, I can answer that question real quick. So basically, if you progress too quickly before the patient is ready, whether it really depends on the treatment plan and how much movement you had programmed to each step. A lot of people have more aggressive treatment plans. Some people have more conservative treatment plans. So you have to kind of calibrate that. It also depends on the patient's wear. All patients say they wear them 22 hours a day, but not all actually do. That's why I really recommend having a compliance check-in program and compliance contract set up. And if you don't know what any of that is, I'd be glad to explain it more. I have a ton of videos on it, or I can go over it with you one-on-one. You can use an automated, like a system that's ready to go, turnkey, like dental monitoring system. You can create your own. And a lot of people are doing that too. Just make sure it's compliant, basically. And if you don't have a compliance contract set up already with your patients, you're in big trouble because all it takes is one patient to break compliance and you're going to be out a lot of extra money. If you're fabricating your own aligners in-house, you're going to be making more aligners. It's going to take you more time and more materials. So you need to have a whole compliance system set up if you're going to do this. Of course, if you're using, say, Invisalign and you have the unlimited case, you've got 5 years to dilly-dally, then who cares, right? It's just your chair time and the patient's time. But you know, time is money here if you're doing white labeling, and the point is to do things most efficiently and most accurately and have a great patient experience. So that's just kind of my thought. All right, so we're still trimming here, but we have more questions.
Go for it.
This is a question for Cadmus Lab. Jason, if you wouldn't mind answering this. What is the most elaborate aligner branding you've been asked to do? Scott or Jason, take it away.
That's a good one. Aside from the one that we did for you at StraightSmile Solutions.
Oh, mine's the best. No kidding. Go ahead.
You know, we're here in Texas and recently got involved with a doctor. You know, we take football very seriously here, and going along with football, we have a dentist that sponsors a competitive dance and cheer team. And he's decided that he wanted to take the aligner treatment into his sponsorship. So he's asked us now to custom brand aligner boxes for competitive dance and cheer team that he sponsors. So, you know, when I said that we're kind of limitless on what we can do, you want glitter, you want sparkles, you want pixie dust, neon color retainer cases, whatever you want to do, we'll put it together for you. So that's probably the most elaborate one we've been asked to do so far.
And branding is super important. And real quick, Jason, I know maybe you're not the best person to speak about this, but I kind of had a couple questions about FDA approval and maybe why you'd want to use someone like Cadmus as opposed to just doing your own, like winging it. I don't know if you have any feedback on that and like what you guys had to go through in order to get your FDA clearance, and how maybe it's like more risk management, you know, risk mitigation if you go ahead and work with an already approved lab.
Yeah, I mean, really it is. It's a process to go through to get into the FDA compliance spectrum. You know, we follow a very strict quality management system. We partnered with one of our team members over in Southern California, walk us through the process to make sure that we were on board with FDA compliance and getting towards our 510K approval. So, you know, really there is a lot of gray area right now in aligners, but you want to make sure that whoever you're using for manufacturing is above board on what they're doing. You know what materials are being used. You have documentation about what machines are being used. Like we talked about, there are bay materials from, you know, your thermoforming machine, your 3D printer, and the actual material that the aligner is being fabricated out of. So we check all the boxes before anything goes to production, just to, you know, make sure that ultimately the patient's ensured safety.
That is awesome. I've got another question here. Just a comment from Scott. He says that he uses in his lab the Mini Star, and he feels it's just as great as the bigger BioStar. So hey, I mean, as long as it works well in your hands, that's all that matters.
It is a workhorse. Mini Star can do it. Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's see. We have another question. Do you think the first thermal formed that you did shouldn't be used to create aligners? I think he's talking about the air vac. Should you not use the air vac to create aligners?
I believe carefully used, you can generate a quality product using a vacuum thermoformer. But I think it's difficult and it takes time and attention for you to choose all the factors wisely for the temperature and time that you're going to do the thermoforming. So it really it is really easier to use a pressure thermoformer and more reliable.
And I think it's worth that extra $3,000, $4,000 just to get it right the first time, because all it takes is one terrible batch, and that's going to ruin your brand. So, and you may not know until the patient has a bad outcome or a bad fit. We had some questions about, I mean, you guys probably don't have the answer for this, but about trim. Would you scallop it? Would you have high trim? Any feedback on that?
Well, that too varies widely between customers. There is some data for sure. If you measure the retention of the device on the model, or the force that it takes to remove the device, for sure, if you trim with a relatively straight line, leaving just a small amount of material at the gum level, but without scalloping, for sure, that increases the retention force of the device on the patient. And we believe that increases the forces that the device is placing on the teeth as well. But varies very widely. There are a lot of clinicians who prefer the scallop. A lot of patients prefer that. That's what they see on the internet, and that's what they expect. But I think it's simpler for your production as well as improving the actual product to leave a straighter line rather than scallop.
And you know, from personal experience on the direct-to-consumer industry, there's 500,000 aligners that have been produced with straight line trim and no attachments. And assuming you have a great treatment plan and great compliance and great, you know, production, it's totally possible to do this, and you'll save a lot of time. Also, yeah, the retention is definitely more efficient, and you can have less attachments if you're going to use attachments, because patients honestly hate attachments. They really hate them, so they think they're ugly. So if you can have less or none, I think it's wonderful. So great question. All right, do we have anything else we have on tap, or we want to go ahead and answer any more questions?
That's all our material for today.
All right, so we're going to go ahead. Let me turn around and see you guys real quick and see if you have any more questions. Hi again. All right, so last chance for questions, either through Q&A if you want it to be private or through the chat. And then we'll kind of just wrap it up and do next steps. Any other questions real quick? Oh, they're coming in. All right, well, I'll do next steps for me, and then we'll do next steps for Bay Materials and next steps for Cadmus.